everybody. Welcome to a new episode of Casing the Joint here at the Boyertown Museum of Historic Vehicles. I'm Kendra.
I'm Dan.
And you'll have to excuse, we have some background noise today. Don't worry. Do not adjust your set. It is not the equipment's fault. We are having some construction work done at the museum. So you're hearing some residual noise. It's what did we just say? It's adding to our atmosphere, the ambiance here.
Something like that.
Yeah. It's a factory. We gotta have stuff moving and working and shaking. So, so here at the Boyertown Museum of Historic Vehicles, of course, we display dozens of vehicles, big things. But we also have a lot of little things here on display. And here at Casing the Joint, we want to take a look at some of those things up close and maybe get a little more information on them because they're sometimes just as cool, if not more so, than some of the vehicles that we have. And they tell their own stories.
And I bet for Casing the Joint, we have this we're going to be talking about.
This is it.
It's just a guess.
It's just a guess.
Yeah.
I did put it on the table for a reason, not just because I felt like it. So yes, we're going to talk about this. Now, this is a model of the Ford Model T assembly line, and it was made by the Franklin Mint. And before we talk about the assembly line a little bit, because I do want to talk about that, it's very interesting, let's talk about the Franklin Mint a little bit, because that actually has some interesting history to it as well. So the Franklin Mint was started in 1964 by Joseph Siegel, and he was born in Philadelphia, so local guy. I didn't know that. I thought that was interesting. And he started over 20 companies in the United States, including QVC in 1986.
Wow,
I didn't know that they were related, but it kind of makes sense.
Yeah, because I know QVC is down
Yep,
that
that's
direction.
in West. I think they're in Westchester. I think the studio. So
and I know Franklin Mint is kind of down that way.
Yeah,
It was.
So it makes sense. But yeah, I thought that was interesting. Which is of course a huge company. Everyone still knows it today. Now, like I said, Siegel was born in Philadelphia in 1931, and he only just recently passed away in 2019 in Gladwin, Pennsylvania. So he kind of stayed in the area his whole life. And how did he get to the Franklin Mint? Well, in 1964, he joined up with a gentleman named Gilroy Roberts, and he was the chief engraver for the U.S. Mint.
Okay.
So coins, making coins and things like that. And Roberts and Siegel started in 1964 the General Numismatics Corporation. Did I say that right?
Close enough. I know what you meant.
Coin collecting,
coin stuff.
essentially. Yeah. And that company becomes the Franklin Mint a year later in 1965. So the first commemorative coin they did was for General Douglas MacArthur. And Siegel also saw that banks were getting a lot of attention and almost a run on banks for people to get silver dollars because they were going to be discontinued.
Back up just a moment. You mentioned a commemorative coin for MacArthur, General MacArthur. Now, did he pass away?
He passed away about that time.
About that time?
Yep.
Okay, okay.
So he saw these two things happening. Douglas MacArthur passing away and this coin to sort of commemorate him, and then these silver dollars not being made anymore, and people of course want them. When you hear something's discontinued, what happens? People run out and try to buy whatever's left because they're not gonna be able to get it again. So he kind of melded these two ideas together into making kind of commemorative items that had a set production run, and they would become collectibles. Now, Roberts, he's interesting too. He was the 9th chief engraver for the U.S. Mint, and you can see a picture of him there working, and that's him working on his most famous design, which is the JFK half dollar, which was very quick because he was just assassinated not too long before this, and they very quickly came out with this half dollar, which he showed to Jackie Jackie Kennedy, and she gave him some nice critiques on how to change it, and make it look more like her husband. So he also once worked at the Bureau of Engraving and Printing, doing postage stamp designs. So he did portraits of Stephen Foster and Eli Whitney and Ralph Waldo Emerson for stamps. So he's a very accomplished artist, portrait artist, an engraver, and then coupling this with the coin thing. That's kind of what started the Franklin Mint then. So now, how is a Franklin Mint model different from something like, a Matchbox car or a Hot Wheel or something like that? Well, these are not really toys. Like we said, these are collectibles. That's kind of what he was keying into. They're very detailed. We have Franklin Mint models here of different cars. Maybe I'll pull some of those out for a different episode, where you can see the hoods open up, you can see the engines inside. They're very detailed. You can open up the doors, you'll see the upholstery and the dashboards. It's all very realistic. It's not a cheap little toy that your kid's gonna bust. And well, your kid could bust it pretty quickly. That's why you don't let the kid play with it. So but what we're talking about today is this. This is like I said, a model of the Model T assembly line. It was done in pewter. And this particular one, it has a little plaque on the front. It'll tell you what number it is. And this is number 797 out of 2,500. So again, the limited production run makes it collectible, makes it something people are more willing to go out and buy. And this is pretty detailed. Even though it's pewter and these things don't open, like the metal cars do, there's still a lot of detail. There's like a little bucket here. There's a locker. There's a spigot over the barrel. There's a little hand truck. There's lots of detail in here, despite the fact that it's not maybe a functioning model like the other ones. Even the back, you see the windows and the doors of the factory, which is pretty neat. Now, the assembly line and Ford's assembly line. So it is a common misconception that Henry Ford is not the first one to use an assembly line for building a car. He didn't invent the assembly line. That was around sometime before. And actually, the first car to use an assembly line in production would have been Olds, or the curved dash Olds. It was not as fast as Henry Ford, but they were the first one to use it. It's really kind of like the first mass-produced car, really, because of using the assembly line. And what Ford did was just kind of really improve it and get it down to a really exact science. So he comes up with the moving assembly line. And he does that in December of 1913. And that's really what makes this so successful for his company. And this is kind of what this model is trying to show, is this moving assembly line.
And this is sort of like the Reader's Digest condensed version.
It is.
Because, there would be, because
it would
you're
be
starting
really
with
long
nothing
if you had
here and complete car.
Yeah, and obviously there's a few more steps we're missing. Mm-hmm. He broke it down that there were 84 tasks to build a Model T, and each worker was trained in one specific task. And with the moving assembly line that he comes up with here, instead of, the car sort of sitting in the middle of the room or whatever, and everyone has to walk to it and do their task, now the car comes to you. That's a big deal. It cuts down on time that way. The worker isn't moving back and forth. They kind of stay in the same spot their whole shift. And also they're not kind of like bumping and running into each other and then they drop their stuff, or, it cuts down on that as well. So this moving assembly line, it started out before this, it would take about 12 and a half man hours to build a car. Then he gets this moving assembly line, which is the belt is pulled by a rope at first, and it cuts that in half, basically, down to about 6 hours. In 1914, then, he improves it again. It's no longer a rope system. It's now a mechanized belt, and it moves 6 feet per minute, which is, pretty decent clip, especially if you're not used to that. And with this mechanized assembly line, they're going to get the production time down to 93 minutes to build a Model T. which is pretty amazing. In June 4th of 1924, the 10 millionth Model T comes off the line 10 years after that moving assembly line debuts. And it also, not only does it cut down on the time, it's going to cut down on the cost of the Model T as well. It's now more affordable for, regular Joes to go out and buy a car. The price goes down by several $100s by the end. I think it gets down to under $300 by the end. So that's a pretty inexpensive car. 15 million Model Ts are sold by 1927, and this makes up for about half the cars in the United States. So, and you can see, we have this model. You're going to see, as I've been speaking, some photos of the assembly line, and you can get a little better idea of how this model kind of relates to what was going on in real life.
I know you can go on YouTube and see, maybe not the whole thing, but you can see
parts.
People, making, putting the connecting rods on the pistons, for instance, and that's all they did.
That's
all
it.
They did, which doesn't sound real exciting, but
doesn't, no.
but they were getting paid good for.
They were.
So.
It was a well-paying job. And now he didn't come up with this all by himself. He did have help. He hired a gentleman by the name of Frederick Winslow Taylor to help him develop this assembly line. And Taylor died soon after he came out with this. So this was towards the end of his career. Here we have another Philadelphia connection. Taylor was born in Philadelphia. He was the son of Quakers, very affluent, wealthy Quakers. And Taylor started to be a leader in something called the efficiency movement. And he worked with a lot of firms and industries or manufacturers on how to increase production and efficiency in their factories. Bethlehem Steel was one of his clients. And Taylor believed that workers, and this is a quote, must do what they are told promptly and without asking questions or making suggestions. It is absolutely necessary for every man in an organization to become one of a train of gear wheels. So his formula for kind of improving efficiency too, tasks should be written out specifically how to do them, and they should be timed. Before they're given to the worker, they should study how long it takes to do a specific task, and that should be listed as part of the task for the worker, so they know they shouldn't take 5 minutes to do something that has been proven to only take 2. So he's very strict. And I read an article about him that was written back in 1979. It was from American Heritage Magazine. You can find it online today. Technology, great.
Oh, yeah.
Great. And the American Heritage article refers to him as the Messiah of Time and Motion, which I think is such a cool title. But he's an interesting fellow, very strict, very regimented. There's really no room for the worker in his mind to balk or even, make suggestions. That's not necessary. This has already, in his mind, been sufficiently scientifically proven that X is the best way to do it, and it should take Y number of minutes. He doesn't mess around.
I think on the side of the worker, though, it's like, this sounds like pretty tedious work, but then they said you have to do it in this amount of time.
Yeah.
And the thing is, if the assembly line's moving 6 feet a minute, and you have a problem getting a bolt on, I'm thinking, uh-oh, and you probably, I'm going to get fired.
Well, think of how we talk about Model Ts, which, we're standing in front of a Model T here, and, they had this reputation for being rattly, and you wonder how much of that was because the poor worker just wasn't able to complete his task in the allotted amount of time. The belt is moving on. It's not stopping for him because he couldn't finish something. It's going to keep on going. And then how does that affect everyone that comes after him? It's interesting. Of course, today, now starting to get robotics and everything to help get these assembly lines moving even faster. In 1961, General Motors started using robotic arms. And in 1969, there's an engineer by the name of Victor Scheinman, and you can see him there with his Stanford arm, which is a 6-segmented robot arm, and it would move and assemble parts. That's a pretty, I think when I think of robots in the automotive industry, that's what I think of, is that arm. It's very well known. There's a lot more to say about the assembly line and Henry Ford's methods to his madness, so to speak. And I'm not going to go into all of them here, but you're already on YouTube. You should go visit another playlist on here, which is Bumper to Bumper. We talk about some of this in episode 7 on there.
After they're done watching this
watching this,
yes.
Go to Bumper to Bumper and watch episode 7. We talk about that, including some of what you were saying about the workers and how that kind of monotony impacted them, because it did. It did affect them, and it changed maybe how people viewed that work, whereas once it was a very skilled job, it starts to start changing into more unskilled labor, and that did have an effect on the workers. It even creeped into their home life a little bit, so you got to go watch that. And but we didn't talk about Taylor on there. He's an interesting fellow. Look him up. No wonder him and Henry got along. Knowing what we know about Henry Ford and how he was very strict, yeah, he picked a guy that was going to work well with him, I think, on this. So this is in a case here, although not with next to the Ford Model T specifically. It's kind of on the other side of the wall. But the case outlines a little bit a timeline of different things that were happening in just the assembly line in automotive production, not just Ford, but talks about Olds too as well. So that's our assembly line, and we hope you'll come visit us here at the museum. We thank you for joining us for this episode of Casing the Joint, and we can't wait to see you the next time.
I got a small assembly line story for you.
Oh, good.
Okay.
Yes.
It doesn't go back to Model T days, but there's a guy I know, and he worked at an assembly line, or on an assembly line, for General Motors. I'm thinking back 50s and 60s that time. And once in a while, one of the high ups of the company, one of the management, they would want to get a car. And so the note would come down and says, okay, this is for Vice President so-and-so, you know, and so they're supposed to give it special attention. But if he was not well liked, they would put like some washers or bolts inside a door and it'd be all closed up. So it worked just the opposite.
Rattle.
Oh yeah, there'd be rattles going on. So
don't make them mad. They know how to get back at you.
Yeah. So yeah. Okay, that was it.
No, that's good. But it's true. There's a lot of like little stuff that happens, and like I said, you know, it goes beyond just the mechanics of this and talk about the mindset of the workers. It's really interesting. So, thanks for joining us today, and we hope to see you next time.